The Great Locomotive Chase was the first time that the Medal of Honor was awarded, as well as being led by a handsome, charismatic leader that nobody can resist. And I mean, they have a bunch of trains, guys, and who doesn't love trains? The raids were planned by General Mitchell. General Mitchell was a pretty smart man, but he was still a minor general, and he was positioned with just a guard force, but he knew he could take Chattanooga if they could cut off the supplies. So that was the plan. Chattanooga, being surrounded by marshes and mountains, would be easy to siege as long as the train tracks were destroyed and the telegraph wires were cut. So he hired some men to do that. How this was able to be done is you needed at least 6 men to pull up a single piece of track, and they needed to be strong men too, as well as you needed crowbars and a bunch of other tools, which the raiders couldn't bring. As well, for cutting wires, it was better if you could blow up the pole, but sometimes you could just cut them with your scissors. And that would work just as well, but it would be easier to repair, which was a huge problem, so the Union tried to innovate on this. While they were trying to innovate on how to properly do this, they found their charismatic leader, James J. Andrews. And he had a plan already, wanting a captain's commission instead of a private's commission as he was trying to sign up, and the Union was quickly capturing the places he'd been spying on. Mitchell promised him a captain's commission if he completed the mission. A train conductor in Georgia was willing to turn their train and to help him pull up track. They just needed a train crew of 17 men. But when Andrews and his men got there, they found out that the train and the driver were already put into service, and there was nothing they could do about that. So they saw a train that was empty and thought, maybe we can steal this. Asking his men if any of them knew how to drive a train, none of them did. So he needed to bring engineers next time because he couldn't rely on people to defect, because if it was a spy, they would have been taken down. They decided to pull up some track and maybe cut a couple of wires to cause chaos. While 16 of the men were fleeing after they pulled up their own things and cutting the wire, a group of Confederate soldiers found the 2 Union soldiers trying to cut the wire. And while the wire fell down, they managed to convince the Confederates that they were wire repairmen, because why would they be dumb enough to wear Union uniforms while cutting the wire? This is a true story and it actually happened. And the Confederates believed them, believing that their uniforms were actually wire cutter uniforms. Andrews then got 22 men who were all willing to die with him, and the plan was they would split off into groups of 2 to go to Big Shanty, Georgia, now known as Kensville. As well, if they were ever caught or questioned, they would say they were from a certain town in Kentucky. They wanted to flee the Union, and they wanted to join the 2nd Georgian Artillery. This was all of their cover stories. And Andrews had a special little trick of his own. The plan was to go to Big Shanty, then on to Kingston, to Adairsville, to Ringgold, and then on to Chattanooga. Big Shanty because that was where a lot of newly treated Confederate troops would train and be shipped off. Kingston because that was a huge train area that had a lot of traffic and a lot of supplies going through it. Adairsville because it simply was a huge army depot, and Ringgold where it was the closest town to Chattanooga before then. All of Andrews' 22 men and himself made it, except for 2, who were pressed into service. They said, hey, we're trying to join the 2nd Georgian Artillery Unit. And what happened? The people they were staying with the night? Well, they were also trying to join the 2nd Georgian Artillery Unit, and they were going with them. So this was a problem, and they just decided to join up, and they were now in the Confederate Army. The chase began in Big Shanty, where the conductor, William M. Fuller, thought that he was perfectly fine. James J. Andrews lied to him, but they were all eating breakfast. This was because passenger cars didn't exist. It was either a crate car or a couple of seats. Now, they took 3 wooden boxes, the coal car, and the engine itself. They thought no one would chase enough, but William M. Fuller and 2 others started chasing them. While chasing them, William M. Fuller and the 2 others were stopped by a party of workers who were wondering what they were doing, And while they were putting up their handcar in the track, William Fuller just took it, got the two others to hop on, and they continued chasing the train. They also found that James J. Andrews destroyed another engine known as the Yamo, but they could still capture the general, who William Fuller was quite attached to. So they continued on their train ride. While they continued pushing, it is realistic that on foot and even handcar would be quicker. They would catch up to them. It took about 30 minutes to even pull up one piece of track, which was usually just enough, but they pulled up 3. As well, it took a couple longer to cut wire, but William Fuller was stopped when his handcar crashed because there was no railroad track where they pulled it up, and they continued trying to get there. Meanwhile, James J. Andrews and the other Union soldiers arrived at Kingston, but it took them 2 hours to get through because 2 emergency trains were pulling from Chattanooga, taking supplies and men away from there, as they didn't want them to get locked in a siege or get captured by Union troops. James J. Andrews said he was working for a Confederate general and that all of his men were actually Confederates, and they were trying to get to Chattanooga to try and enforce it with a critical secret. William M. Fuller literally arrived 4 minutes and 30 seconds after James J. Andrews left on foot. He ordered them to send a message saying there was a rogue train, and they believed him, so they sent the message, but it was too late. He already cut the telegraph wire and started pulling up railroads. They took a new train, and they decided to try and continue the chase. They were continued with 11 more men, trying to hopefully get an even advantage over them. But once again, they were stopped when their train crashed because James J. Andrews took off the rail. As they were running to try and still catch up with them, knowing that they could eventually capture culprits, especially if they stopped at another train station, they ran into the Texas, who was about to crash in the same area they just crashed. They quickly stopped them, and since it was going southbound, they had to go backwards, but that was fine. They started the chase again. Now, they were in sight of James J. Andrews, so they could no longer stop to try and pull up rail or cut wires. So, what ended up happening was they started using the carts, originally intended to burn bridges by lighting them on fire and then putting them in the middle of the bridge. They lit one on fire and then set it to try and light the coal and take out the engine that was chasing them, not wanting to engage in a direct fight, because that would take too long and it would take them down. But they managed to stop the fire and continue the trace, but it did give James J. Andrews and the Unions enough time to light a bridge on fire, and while they were chasing them, they saw the bridge on fire and were about to stop when rain started coming down and it extinguished the fire. Now, it was pretty close, and James J. Andrews, not wanting to get in a fight because he knew that eventually they would catch up, began saying, "We need to get out." While they were driving, and right as William M. Fuller crossed the bridge, they all of a sudden saw a bunch of Confederate cavalrymen chasing them down. So he ordered the evac. Everyone got out and ran, and William Fuller met with the Confederate army, and he would be rewarded for his actions. But they scattered in every single different direction, hoping to try and follow the same plan, and managed to make it out and get back to Federal lines. All of the raiders were captured, including the 2 who already joined the army. This was done because all of them gave the same cover story, and all of them already had descriptions of their faces done, and they led to an investigation on the 2 that already joined the regiment, and they were also thrown in jail. Now that the 22 raiders were all in there, they started fearing what might happen to them, started fearing execution as well. William M. Fuller, for his part and his dedication to his train and trying to stop these raiders, led to him getting a commission as a captain, which he renewed till the end of the war. He managed to guard the Georgian trains even while Sherman was coming in. He couldn't touch the trains that William Fuller was guarding because he trained his men so viciously that simply they couldn't touch him without getting a really bad fight that would probably leave more Confederates dead than Union soldiers. Or Confederate to Union, I mean. Now, The 2 guards that were watching them in their cells, when they opened the door, all of them scrambled and knocked him out. 7 were captured immediately, but the rest managed to escape. And they ran. They ran to try and get back to federal lines, trying to escape the Confederates. A lot of times they would try to run south to hopefully get into the Gulf and make it to the Union blockade. But let's see what happened to them. William Pittenger detailed all of these events in his journal and his testimony. In fact, he wrote, while he was still on the run, to the Secretary of War saying, "These men deserve the Medal of Honor, if no other men." And the Secretary of War obliged him. And William Pittenger was later captured, but he managed to convince the Secretary of War, and on September 17, 1863, all of the escapees of the raid were awarded. This was 7 men. But an 8th man managed to escape twice after being captured, and then he escaped again, captured again, and managed to finally escape and make it back to Union lines July 20th, 1864. He was also awarded the Medal of Honor. These men were the very first men to ever get the award, and treasured it deeply. 6 men got captured, including William Pittenger, but all of them were exchanged for 12 Confederate men. As they were walking out on March 25th, 1863, they were met with the Secretary of War's secretary and was awarded the Medal of Honor personally. They then went home and went on a press tour, joining the 7 others who managed to escape. And they still wondered what happened to their comrades who weren't in the exchange. On June 18, 1862, 6 of the men were executed as spies, including the civilian William Campbell, who joined Andrews as a close friend, and he was promised that he would also make it and live with him, and James J. Andrews would protect him throughout the war. He was hung as a spy. They were all awarded the Medal of the Honor post-mortem, but they did still have the honor of knowing that they caused the Confederacy a headache. Meanwhile, James J. Andrew was executed June 7th, the day he was recaptured. He was ineligible for the Medal of Honor, but he did have one request that the Confederates did oblige him. He asked to meet the conductor that so ruthlessly chased him, and according to legend, William M. Fuller got up to the gallows, shook his hand, and then James J. Andrews dropped. The Andrews Raid, or the Great Locomotive Chase, was a headache for the Confederates at a time, but overall didn't cause much damage or much chaos. Hey everyone, thank you for watching. I know this was a bit of a weird video, and it is longer than most of my other videos, so I hope you like and subscribe. This was a blast to make, and I really enjoyed making it, so let me know if you want to see more stuff like this. And thanks for watching if you got through this far. P.S. It also makes a really good movie, which you guys should all watch, because I love it. It has Fess Parker in it, and it's from the 50s. Whoa, what a great video. On the left, that's a video I think you should personally watch. On the right, well, that's a video YouTube thinks you should watch. I don't know. Wouldn't want to be like a Timmy and choose the one on the right. Isn't that right, Timmy? You know what you did.